My name is Willie Gevers. I'm with Gevers Wealth Management. We're over here in Issaquah, Washington, and we spent the last 30 years helping successful families manage their wealth and optimize their finances. And one topic that comes up quite often is, surrounds their houses, their where they live, and the questions are, how do we own our house? What's the best way to sell our house and minimize taxes? How do we buy a second house? How do we finance a second house? How can we do it with our investments, with our IRA accounts, with our other assets? Should we take a loan out? Can we afford a second house? Can we afford a third house? Can we afford a fourth house? What about trust? So there's all kinds of issues that roll around that. And oftentimes our house is one of our most valuable assets. So a very important subject and something we spend a lot of time on. So this summer, Jamie and Bill and I were brainstorming and talking about some of the subjects. And Jamie said, gosh, wouldn't it be great if we shared some of those concepts with her clients, my clients or Jamie's clients. So we came up with this idea, or Jamie came up with this idea, and so we've got a 3-part class we're doing. This is the second of 3, and we're focusing on some of the tax and trust and financial legal strategies surrounding houses. So we're going to record tonight. There's a recording available, YouTube available. We have a case study, a handout that we'll make available to you that we can send you later if you're interested. But glad you're here. And again, our focus and our goal for last month, this month, and next month is just to explore some of the issues surrounding valuable houses for successful families, and how do we optimize our finances and how do we make good choices. So our subject tonight is going to be ownership entitlement. What are some of the ownership issues? How do we own a house? What are some of the pitfalls or problems associated with how we own the house? We'll talk about individual ownership, tenant commons, community property, joint with right of survivorship, living trust, limited liability company, and we'll just discover some of those issues and what they mean and how to use them and what they mean to us as homeowners. And then we're also going to identify or introduce one of the trust strategies in the estate planning toolbox, and that's a charitable remainder trust. So we'll spend a few minutes on that, introduce the topic, how it works, why they're popular, what the use case is, and what some of the benefits and disadvantages are. And then we'll finish up with a case study on the charitable remainder trust that might talk about how we might use a CRT or a charitable remainder trust with your home sale. So again, we're going to cover. We'll have recordings tonight. We'll have handouts. So everything we have, you'll be able to look at in more detail. So let's jump into our subject. I'm going to pull up and by the way, when we finish up, we're going to have some time for Q&A too. So if there's some questions that have come up, we can hit those, and I can also add some things also. So let's start off with some of our slides. So let me pull this up. Jamie, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So so here's our goal today, talking about title and ownership issues for your home in the introduction to charitable remainder trust. So let's start off with a quick review of last meeting. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I just want to cover this briefly because it gives us kind of a context for what we're going to talk about today. So would
you like to make that full screen, Willie?
Yeah, let's do it this way. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So here's the challenges involved in transferring your house. First off, the practical parts, the sale. I mentioned last time that that's where Jamie and Bill excel in. Jamie is a phenomenal real estate agent. As I was preparing for this class, I went back and I thought about our life, and Jamie and Bill have actually helped us buy and sell 5 different pieces of property in our family over the last few years. So they're phenomenal at what they do. They're wonderful real estate agents. I would highly recommend them. And I know that's why you're here today, but just kind of a shout out to Bill and Jamie. They're extremely gifted real estate agents, and as someone who's been full time in the finance business for 30 years, I wouldn't say that lightly. So, as one of their clients, just all respect for them. They do fantastic in preparing, researching, marketing, negotiating, closing. They're very, very good at what they do. But let's suppose that we do decide to transfer our house. Here's some things that we have to face. First is the tax hurdle. And unfortunately, there's several layers of taxes we have to deal with, you guys. First off is capital gains tax. So we have the cost basis of our house. If we're married and it's our personal residence, we might potentially be able to exclude $500,000 in gains. But if you bought a house in the lake, or you own a house in the Issaquah or Bellevue or Seattle area for a long time, our gain could be way, way more than that. And anything above our cost basis and after the $500,000 exclusion could potentially be charged a capital gains tax. Capital gain tax, essentially for most of us with 15%, for a lot of us in high income brackets, could be 20%, not hard to get there. And if you jump to the 20% rate, there's also additional surcharges on top of that. So 20% plus maybe 2 levels of surcharges is the worst case scenario. So it's a big tax bill. There's not many direct ways to get around it, but there are some ways to mitigate it. So we talked last meeting about tax loss harvesting as a proactive strategy to reduce that. And today I'll talk about how the charitable remainder trust might be another strategy to try to take away some of the sting there. We talked about step up in basis and how it works. Let me just quickly explain that if you're not familiar with that. If you own a house and if you own it for a long time, your basis might be here, the current market value might be here, and the difference, of course, is the gain. Well, one of the kind of twists of the tax code is if we pass away, then in a lot of cases, the basis gets stepped up. In other words, it goes up to the current fair market value. So it's a powerful tax planning tool. Unfortunately, we don't want to use that or recommend that as a strategy because, of course, you have to pass away to take advantage of that. But it's important to know how it works because, as I'll point out today, we could shoot ourselves in the foot if we are not careful on the step up in base. So very important. But again, one of the twists in the tax code is when you pass away, if your estate, if your house is structured properly, it will probably step up. In other words, get a new cost basis and wipe out all the existing tax. We've also got federal estate tax. Right now, the current exemption is $12.9 million a person. So if you're married, you've got almost $26 million that you can pay pass estate tax free. So for a lot of us, we might think, well, heck, we're home free. However, there's going to be a really big change at the end of 2025. The TGCA Tax Act that was passed during President Trump's presidency is going to expire at the end of 2025. And the way it looks today, the exemption is going to go down to something like $5 million a piece. So there are lots of successful families who may not have an estate tax bill today, but could have a pretty large liability in about 2 years, depending on maybe who's in power and what Congress decides. But here's what we need to know, you guys. The tax bill does sunset unless Congress agrees, and that's hard for them to do unless they agree and extend it. The estate tax rate is going to change substantially for the worse in about 1.5 years. So very important. We need to watch this very carefully. And then finally, the third hurdle we have to pass is the Washington state estate tax. And that's currently about 2.2 million free per person. And the tax rate starts at 10% and goes up to about 20%. And that's also a very big bill. And sometimes we ignore that, but it can be very, very painful. So we also want to do everything we can to try to avoid that. So again, reviewing from last meeting, as far as state taxes go, and this will tie into some of our strategies, if you're above 25.9 million today, your family has a serious estate tax problem, no matter what happens to future and tax rates. If you're below 4.4 million, then your family may not have a Washington or a federal estate tax problem if you just do some simple trust planning. The real dilemma, you guys, the dilemma is for families that have estates between about 4.5 million and then 26 million, because you may not have a tax bill today, but you may have a very, very big tax bill in a couple of years. So you're going to see a lot of conversation. You're going to see a lot of writing in Forbes and Barron's and a lot of the financial publications in the next year about the coming change in taxes. And we're already having conversations with our clients about this. And this is something that's we want to put on our list. A final thought there, if you think, gosh, maybe I'm not there yet, Warren Buffett amassed over 90% of his wealth after he turned 65. So it's a power of compounding, you guys. So my wife and I are trying to take good care of ourselves. I know Bill and Jamie are in great health, and hopefully we all are too. So if we live a long time, the numbers we have today could be even larger. So this is a pretty big deal. And obviously, to stick with the topic for tonight, the house may be one of our biggest, if not our biggest asset in our state. So the question is, what are our goals for our home? What do we want to achieve? So I wrote it perfect. All right, just for recording's sake, let me go to the last thing. So in Proverbs it says a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. So that's kind of what we want to think about, you guys, on as regards to our houses, what are our goals? What are we trying to achieve? What are our financial goals? What do we want to do for our kids or our grandkids? What's important to us. So we kind of look at every decision we make, trust planning and tax planning through those kind of filters and try to figure out what our goals are. So let's use that to jump into today's topic. So let's talk about titling and ownership of your home. So this seems very simple and straightforward. When you buy a house, when Jamie prepares the MLS purchase and sale agreement for you, you've got a couple boxes to check. You can pick individual, you can pick community property. It seems pretty straightforward. If you're married, you'd probably pick community property. But we want to watch out because I get to look at people's finances and their assets in great detail, and I see lots of mistakes here. These things come up on a relatively frequent basis. So let me point out what they are. First off, individual ownership for a married couple is kind of problematical because of the step up in basis. So let me explain what that means. I'll give you a real life example. We have a family we work with that's a local family, well-to-do, and the wife got seriously ill, and she got so ill that we just said we were quite alarmed and said, okay, let's do an audit of their assets and just if the worst happens, let's make sure that we're kind of covered. So we reviewed all the investment accounts of beneficiaries, their retirement accounts, their home deed. And one of the things that came out was the husband owned a large piece of property outside the state. And I knew about it, but I didn't really know much about it. And so we looked at the deed, and he owned the land in his name only. So here's what would have happened, you guys. If you have a piece of property that's in your name only and your spouse passes away, then the property doesn't get a step up in basis. So again, forgive me for talking about this in such a cold and clinical way. We're talking life and death issues and times of great personal grief, and these are really serious life issues that are far more serious and more deeper than just money. But while we're at it, again, let's try to optimize our finances. So in their case, what we recommended was, hey, let's get together with their tax attorney as soon as possible. Let's add her name to the deed. So what would happen in that case, if something happened to one of the two of them, then we get a step up in basis. In other words, all the taxes get wiped away. So again, you want to be very careful. This kind of stuff happens on a regular basis. So we would normally own a property as community property, or sometimes TIC, which stands for tenants in common. But if we own it that way, you typically, if one person passes, then the property gets a full step up, and that's such a good tax advantage. We want to make sure that we have structured our assets in such a way we don't lose that. Here's another example on ownership. But I think I mentioned this last time too. But the husband and wife in Issaquah, the husband passed away in 2017, I believe, and so the wife took over ownership of the house. She had it in her name only, and the value of the house was stepped up to 2017. But if you remember the last year's histories, excuse me, if you remember the last year's histories, house prices have skyrocketed since 2017. So her cost basis was based on the 2017 date. She actually started to get quite ill and went to hospice about a year ago. And unfortunately, her son and his brother got some really bad advice from someone else, and mom transferred the house from her individual name to the two brothers' name, and then she subsequently passed away a few months later. So here's what happened: because the property wasn't held in her name when she passed away, there was no step up in basis, and the two brothers inherited the house at the value at what it was when their dad passed in 2017. So they subsequently sold the house, and unfortunately, they had to pay a very, very large tax bill. Again, kind of a sad story. They got very bad tax advice. In fact, that's actually why they came to our firm and became clients, because they got some. Unfortunately, they just missed out on what could have been. But the important part is you want to be careful of the ownership and make sure that step up in basis is something we can take advantage of, and we also want to make sure that again, we don't miss out on that, especially as we get closer to end of life or there's health issues. Another issue to think about is trust funding issues. So let's suppose that you meet with your tax attorney or you meet with your advisor and you build a new estate plan and you've got trust, and the trust will get funded as a method to try to avoid taxes. Well, if you don't have your ownership set up properly, you can basically bypass the trust funding. So let me give you an example of that. Another type of ownership is joint tenant with right of survivorship. It's sometimes abbreviated JTWROS. And again, on the your purchase and sale agreement, there may be several boxes where you pick what type of ownership arrangement you like. So joint with survivorship, while you're both living, it looks and smells and acts just like community property or TIC. But when somebody passes, it's completely different. And here's what happens if you have a joint with survivorship ownership. Then when the first person passes, what the value of the house would immediately go to the survivor. That's why it's called joint with survivorship. So you might say, well, what's wrong with that? But again, let's suppose you have a trust set up and the intent of your attorney, of your plan, is to fund the trust when the first person's gone. But the joint with survivorship titling ownership basically overrides that trust designation and goes directly to the surviving spouse. And so you can really kind of blow up your estate plan. Again, unfortunately, I've seen this happen multiple times, and you want to be very careful that if you're doing trust planning, that your ownership, your beneficiaries, and your trust funding all work really well together, and they don't they don't supersede each other. Another option you have is called transfer on death. I think this, Jamie, you probably know better than me, but I think this is a relatively new thing in titling in the state of Washington. But what that means is you can add a transfer on death titling onto your deed, and it acts a little bit like a beneficiary on your IRA account. And so if both persons are gone, the house will immediately transfer to whoever your beneficiaries are on that transfer on death. There's no probate, there's no legal issues, and it can be very clean and very easy and very inexpensive. However, it has the same problem I just mentioned. That transfer on death designation supersedes trust funding. So if you've got a trust in your estate plan, you can kind of blow up the planning that your tax and legal team's done for you. So again, let me give you an example of how the transfer on death titling works and how it might be advantageous. So my mother-in-law was a professor. Had a modest estate, and she had a house in Arizona, and she wanted things to be really clean and easy for my wife and my wife's brother. So she set up her Arizona house as a transfer on death titling. So when she passed, what happened is my wife and my brother went down to Arizona. They just basically were able to very quickly transfer the title over to their names. There was no out-of-state probate. They didn't have to hire an attorney. There was basically no cost to do that, and they were very able to, kind of quickly and cleanly sell the house. So it was a smart move on my mother-in-law's part. Made things very easy. It's a very, kind of a blessing at the end of life to my wife and to my brother-in-law, and it just was very simple and very clean. Now, if she hadn't done that, if she just left it in her name, my wife and her brother-in-law would have had to open probate in Arizona, hire an attorney, put out legal notices, and maybe appeared before the probate court. Certainly the attorney would have had to. There would have been legal fees. There would have been delays. Might have taken months for it to go through probate, and after paying a pretty big tax bill or a pretty big attorney bill, the house might have eventually been theirs. But by contrast, the transfer on death, very simple, very clean, very easy. But again, everything I'm sharing with you, you want to really be careful that you talk to your tax advisors about this, because a transfer on death might be great for you, but it also might potentially blow up your existing estate plan. So you've got to watch things very, very carefully on how you set that up. Let me talk about another way to own our home. That's a living trust. Now, a lot of people get living trusts, and if you go and get a living trust, you could own the house in the name of the living trust. So let me kind of give a quick explanation. I'm not going to go into great detail, but the easy way to think of a living trust, it's a substitute for a will. So instead of having a will that says this is where I want all my belongings to go, you might have a living trust document that would do basically the same thing. But the advantage for living trust, why people get them, is because the living trust is not subject to probate. And they still get the step up in basis. This is one of the trusts that would get the step up I mentioned a few minutes ago. So that is advantageous. But here's the reason I put that here, you guys. We see this, probably once every couple of years. We'll meet with a new client or review somebody who's just come in, and they'll have gone to an attorney. They'll have spent thousands of dollars to set up a living trust. So they'll have this very expensive piece of paper, but the piece of paper is basically worthless. Why? Because they never moved their assets into the living trust. So if you have a living trust, you still need to actually move the house to the trust. So if Jamie was filling out a purchase and sale agreement, it wouldn't say Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. It would say, the living trust for Mr. and Mrs. Johnson established, September 15th, 2023, trusteed by Mr. and Mrs. Johnson or something like that. So people miss this all the time. Living trusts, I think, actually are pretty good, robust ways to set up our state. I do like them, but the important part, and the reason I mention this, is super important to make sure your house is in a living trust. Another way you can miss this is if you're buying a new property. So you might have your living trust, maybe you set it up years ago, and maybe you have everything set up properly, but you sell your existing house, you buy a new one, and you forget to put the new house in the living trust. So again, important to kind of check the titling and ownership of your house and your other houses. Simple things, you guys, but really easy to kind of get stung by them and pay unnecessary taxes and legal costs and probate if you don't do it all the time. Let me give you one more twist on the living trust. A lot of people own out-of-state real estate. Like, for example, I just had a meeting this afternoon, and kind of chuckled. This is a family that lives on Mercer Island, and they bought a house in the middle of Iowa. And I was just laughing at it. I was just asking how they liked Iowa, but they love it over there. They bought a castle compared to it. They kept their Mercer Island house, but the backstory is their daughter and son-in-law moved over there, so of course they wanted to be close to them. But so now we have two residences. Their residency is still in Washington. They have a very, very nice house in the middle of Iowa, and what the smart move for them to be would be to set up a living trust to own their out-of-state property. And an attorney can set up something called a title holding trust. It's basically a skinny down, just a very simple living trust, and the only purpose for that is to hold out-of-state property. Again, why is this important? If you own out-of-state property, you would go through probate for every state that you own that property in. So the family that I met with today, for example, owns property in 3-4 different states. And so if something happened to one or both of them, it's a gigantic legal bill for their family. So again, a cool way to get around this, a real simple, easy, legal, just kind of center of the road strategy, is to set up these living trusts called title holding trusts and move your out-of-state property to them and have your out-of-state property own that. So again, if you have out-of-state property, maybe put that on your list of something to think about. If you haven't done this, that's something you can check with your tax advisor or your tax attorney and see if that's something you may want to think about. I'm going to change gears here and talk about something different for a minute, but let me stop. I've been talking for a long time. Any questions or comments, you guys, on ownership, on living trusts, or transfer on death, or joint survivorship and individual ownership?
Willie, I had a client ask me about putting their daughter on title. So they have out-of-state property and they have in-state property. And they are wanting to avoid probate. Everybody's healthy right now. Mom and dad are still alive. Would that be the proper way to just add to the deed their daughter, or is there a disadvantage to that?
Yeah, that's something you want to walk very carefully through. There's all kinds of complications there. I see people talk about that all the time, and usually the reason, the motivation or the heart behind that is A, they want to keep things simple for their kids. B, they want to share control, in case something happens to them, and C, they want to avoid probate or avoid legal issues. So those are all great motivations. They're all important. I support all those, but adding someone to your deed might not be the right way to do it. you might create, a lot of problems. I'll give you a couple of examples. Number one, if you add someone to the deed, the IRS might look at that as a gift. Let's suppose you have a $5 million house and owned by mom and dad, and you add one of your children to the house. Well, do they have full, right to the house? Do they have, ownership and enjoyment? That could be argued as a gift, and all of a sudden you're on the hook for a gift tax. Second issue is the step up in basis. You probably would still get that with a third person on there, but that's something to check with a CPA. Another issue, and this is probably the biggest one, is how it operates in the context of your estate plan. So as I mentioned earlier, if you've got any kind of trust set up, if you have a third person on there, like your daughter or your son, and in that case, it'd probably be some kind of survivorship deed. Well, mom and dad are gone, everything goes to the daughter. Again, that bypasses any trust that you may set up in your plan. Let me give you a real life example. This is from a family that kind of lives up here in Issaquah. The husband was a fairly top executive at a local corporation, and he unfortunately passed away very unexpectedly. And his retirement account, unbeknownst to anybody, his retirement account was his beneficiary was one of his 4 kids. And I understand why he did it. I think I understand why he did it. This particular daughter is also one of our clients, very smart, very savvy, very financially successful. She was kind of of the 4 kids, she was the one that did the best financially. So I think he was thinking, hey, she's the one that could take care of things. But she ended up inheriting a 7-figure plus retirement account. And all of a sudden, everybody was scratching their heads, go, what do we do now? So the way the rules work is the daughter could have taken everything to herself and not shared anything with her siblings. And first off, that would cause family strife. That would probably never end. It might blow up a family. But fortunately, the 4 kids all love each other. They're very close, and they all decide, hey, we want to split this equally. But it made things really complicated because the daughter is limited from giving money to her siblings because she's got the annual $17,000 gift limit. So if she exceeded that, she had to take other steps. And so there wasn't really any easy way to pull it out. Plus, every time she pulled money out, she paid taxes. So it made for a real big mess. So fortunately, the kids all kind of came up with a way to kind of keep each other happy, and she ended up drawing money out of the account over an extended period, and kind of evened things up eventually. But they could have avoided a lot of taxes and a lot of potential heartache by naming all 4 kids or just one of them. And so the same is true, Jamie, with your example. If there's more than one child, but you only add one child to the deed, that leaves the child with a real dilemma. How do you even up with the rest of the siblings? What about taxes? What about the gift tax threshold? It gets really complicated. So again, I love the heart motivation for doing that, for adding someone on the deed. But what you may want to do is think about adding your child in that case as maybe a successor power of attorney, maybe a successor trustee on a living trust. There's other methods you can use to accomplish simplicity and avoiding probate and maybe sharing control without creating some kind of problems along the way.
Great, thanks, Willie. Does anybody else have a question? Just pipe right in if you do.
Yeah, this is one of those areas that unfortunately I could spend the next half hour just giving examples of how not to do it. So you want to be very careful that everything's done right. So let me talk about best practices. What we like to do is especially when our clients get a new estate plan updated, we typically go to we meet with the estate attorney and our clients together to kind of facilitate that and kind of be part of it. And then once the estate plan is done, what I like to do, or what our team likes to do, is we ask the estate attorney to write us a letter, and the letter would say, okay, here's instructions. Your real estate should be structured like this. Your IRA should be structured like this. Your Roth IRAs, your retirement accounts, your life insurance, and best practices to go through every asset and check the ownership, check the beneficiaries and just make sure everything's set up properly. And we like to do this on a regular basis. In fact, every couple of years we tend to try to encourage our clients to go through that exercise. And every time we do this, you guys, it's very common for us to find things that they're missing beneficiaries or titled incorrectly. There's people they didn't want to have on there. There's just all kinds of problems. So again, little simple things, but it can really mess you up. The good news is really easy to fix. The bad news is if something happens to you, then that can cause unintended consequences to your family. So again, best practices, your action item as a follow-up is you might want to just go back and audit everything you have and make sure that the ownership and the beneficiaries titling is set up properly to kind of meet with all your financial goals.
I just have a general question about putting things into a trust. Can you put everything, all of your bank account, can you put everything in there?
Maybe. Actually, here's a better answer. If you have an asset that already has a beneficiary in there, you wouldn't put it into a trust. So a classic example is your IRA account. Your IRA has a beneficiary in there. If you're married, your beneficiary is probably your wife or your husband. And you wouldn't put the IRA in the living trust. The reason why is because the IRS says that if an IRA is owned by a non-person, then you lose all the tax deferral. So again, I've seen people make that mistake too. But if you make an IRA the beneficiary, or excuse me, if you make a living trust a beneficiary of an IRA, or if you try to transfer the ownership of an IRA to a living trust, you might create a giant tax bill. So again, best practices. That's why I like to coordinate with the estate attorney, sometimes even with the CPA, and just make sure we have everything titled properly and set up properly. And the way to think about it is, if you have a good estate plan in place, you've got like a tree or a flow chart of how everything should flow down to the people you love, and the trust might be there to help you flow that. But what you need to do is you need to make sure that all your individual assets are set up properly so they flow the way that you hope them to or you want them to. So great question, Jamie. But again, the simple answer: beneficiary assets, assets like IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, life insurance. You would typically not put those in a living trust. Assets that don't have beneficiaries, like your bank account, your brokerage account, your non-IRA investment accounts, bank CDs, money market accounts, most of your real estate, that could and might go into a living trust.
Great, thank you.
Let me add one more type of ownership, and that's a limited liability company. So I kind of left that at the end because it's a little bit different story, but you could also potentially put your real estate into an LLC or a limited liability company and make the LLC be the owner of the property. So why would you want to do that? Well, this is a little more advanced strategy, but there's two big advantages why people use them, and one of them helps you while you're living. The second helps you as an estate tax reduction. So the first one is creditor protection. So I'll give you an example from my personal life. My wife and I own some rental property, and one of the houses we own is a vacation rental over Lake Chelan, and we have a swimming pool there and a hot tub, and we're very careful about screening, about the ages of people we have there. But I'm realistic. I know there's probably still people over there maybe drinking too much or doing things they shouldn't do, and I'm concerned about it. We do everything we can to try to minimize that or stop that. But my as a financial person, my fear is that some kind of accident happens here. So we pray over the house. We just don't want anything to happen. We've got umbrella insurance, but the fear is somebody could get injured there, and if they get injured, what will they do? Well, they'll probably hire an attorney and have a lawsuit for damages. So again, you as a responsible landlord, you want to do everything you can, fences and gates and signs, and do everything you can to avoid any kind of hazards. But if something like that happens, an LLC is not necessarily it's not necessarily creditor proof, but it's very very unattractive to a personal injury attorney. So if if a personal injury attorney takes on a case, one of the first things they're going to say is, well, how likely is it that we're going to get a payout here? And personal injury attorneys, typically get paid on contingency. They take maybe 30 to 40% of their winnings. And so if there's a situation where they think, hey, there's a very valuable house, if we can win this, we can force the sale of the house and I can get my fee, they might be very likely to take that case. But if the house is in a limited liability company, it really limits what kind of damages that the attorney and the plaintiff can enjoy. So for that reason, a limited liability company is a very, very common and a very powerful protection against liability. So if you have a waterfront house, it's something to think about. What if the dock guy falls off the dock and breaks his ankle and sues you, or what if somebody is a guest there and something happens? I mean, there's all kinds of unfortunate things that can happen in this world. So sometimes people put their properties in the LLC to try to protect against creditors. So it's an unfortunate reality of the world we live in, but there's a lot of litigation out there, and an LLC is can be one shield or one barrier that can protect your assets against a lawsuit. A second reason is an LLC is a great way to discount value of real estate as you transfer it to your kids. So this is a little bit complicated, but let me explain it this way. Here's why you can discount the value of something in a limited liability company. Well, first off, an example. Let's suppose you have a $2 million house and you put it into an LLC. Well, the house is still worth $2 million. If you put it up in the market and sold it, it wouldn't change its value that it's in an LLC. However, the IRS might allow you to discount the value of the house if you transfer shares to your kids or your grandkids. And think of it this way. Let's suppose that let's suppose the house next door is for sale, and you think, oh my gosh, this looks like a good deal. I'm going to call Jamie up. I'm going to buy this house. This might be a good investment. And the house is, listed for $1 million. So you say, well, gosh, that's a good deal. I'm going to buy it. But then when you look into it, you find out that the owner doesn't want to sell the house. They want to sell a tenth of the house. And so that's kind of crazy. I have never heard of anybody buying a tenth of a house, but if by some chance you would, rationally, you wouldn't pay a tenth of $1 million. You might say put some fraction of that, because now you got to deal with other people in the house. You don't have control. You're a minority interest. There's liquidity issues. So it's because of those reasons that you can get, fairly normally get maybe a 30 to 40% discount on the value of shares in an LLC. So let me illustrate how that might work in a transfer position. Let's suppose that you want to give your house to your kids, but you want to give it to them slowly over time, and you want to give it to them in the most cost advantageous way. So you put your house into an LLC, and then the first year you put in there, you have your kids and you give each of them, a share of the LLC. Well, the LLC will be valued, and the value again could be 30 or 40% or even more below market value. And so you in essence get to give those shares to your kids at a greatly discounted value. Again, let me give you a real life example. A family over on the water on Lake Washington. They bought a house years ago. The house is worth well into the 8 figures now, and it's a major part of their estate. They'd pay a gigantic estate tax on that. So they're still in pretty good health. They're still relatively young. They've got three kids. So they set up an LLC, and every year they gift shares of the LLC to their kids. And the goal is to transfer at least some of the house over to their kids, so they can and do that at a very low cost, and so they can start to drain down their estate, so they have a lower estate tax bill sometime in the future. So it's a little bit complex, you guys. And if it's something you're interested in, maybe check it off on your list. You probably want to talk to somebody who's got experience in this who can explain it to you. There's additional tax complications in doing this. It's going to take a little more work every year. You'll probably have to file a K-1. So, but it's a very, very powerful tool for creditor protection, very powerful tool to pass assets on to your kids at a greatly discounted value. And because that it's pretty powerful. One question I put on there, if you pursue this, you want to make sure that you've got it set up properly so that if you use an LLC, you still get a step up. In most cases, you probably still can do that, but again, just kind of a note of caution. Lots of things to think about. So if this kind of piques your interest, put this on your action list as something to look at. But again, you probably want to educate yourself and look at it in more detail and see if that's something that makes sense. So let's sum up where we've been so far, you guys. Number one, very simply, very important to own your property correctly. Again, my takeaway, my suggestion to you is might be a good time to review, all your assets, not just your house, but your personal residence, your vacation properties, maybe commercial properties, your IRAs, your brokerage accounts, your investment accounts, your bank accounts, your all the other assets. Check your ownership, make sure they're set up properly. Check to make sure that they work properly with any trusts or estate documents you've got set up. And every time you get your estate plan revised or updated, you want to also make sure you've got that set up properly too. And also obviously get good advice and make sure that everything is flowing properly in your plan. So again, let me stop here for a minute. Bill and Jamie, I know we've talked about LLCs before. Any comments or thoughts on this?
No, actually, but I've seen a lot of that in real estate. I've also seen a lot of just getting houses ready for market or getting ready to place an offer, going and looking at the history of the house. You see a lot of trust making, a lot of changing of titles and things. So there's a lot of planning going on out there, that's for sure. And Bill was just commenting that, hey, we haven't done that for our house yet. We need to figure out what we need to do. So phone call incoming.
Good. Well, if our session this month kind of creates some action items and things that we can all follow upon and help ourselves, and I feel we've met our goals. I feel very good about that. And by the way, again, let me shout out back to Jamie and Bill. Jamie is extremely detail oriented, and if you work with another real estate agent, they may not have any input for you. I just think one of the reasons Jamie's so good at what she does is she goes 3 levels deep as far as details go. And the fact that we're having this discussion, in the context of real estate purchase and sales, I think it's kind of unique. Again, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I don't do this, with most real estate agents. So all respect to Jamie for just being very, very savvy and very wise about identifying areas that would be important in buying and selling and making sure that her clients are well taken care of.
Willie, with the sunsetting coming up of the larger federal estate tax exclusions, are you seeing a lot of your clients starting to transfer over properties or certain percentage through LLCs to take advantage of if they have more of a net worth that gets up into that $26 million range? Are they doing that now? Because it seems like you have this window of opportunity time to do it before it gets reduced.
Yeah. People tend to act with urgency, Bill. And about a year and a half ago, President Biden tried really, really hard to push through a lot of very, very onerous tax reform. So the step up in basis was in the crosshairs. There was a very serious bill that Senator Warren and Senator Sanders were trying to push through to eliminate that. The discount for LLC transfers was also in the crosshairs. They were trying to get rid of that. They were trying to raise tax rates. There was all kinds of very very, very unhappy things, and they didn't pass, but I think they came pretty close. And so we had a lot of conversations the year that happened, and people were looking at ways to try to proactively take care of or take advantage of their exemptions and do that. The bill ended up not passing. I think it got pretty close to an election year, so I think the Democrats wisely kind of backed off on that, so there wouldn't be political ammo there. So we're gonna, the next benchmark is the end of 2025, and so so if nothing happens in Congress, that's when all these things happen. The real big thing to try to take advantage of is the exemption. So what you're seeing people talk about, and I haven't seen a lot of people actually take action yet, but there's been a lot of conversations. But if you have a state that's less than 25 or 26 million, but greater than say 10 million, then you are the one that's going to lose the most with the new bill, because your exemption is going to go from 12.9 per person to maybe 5 million per person. So the kind of questions people are asking is, well, how can we proactively use that larger exemption we have before 2025? So that's kind of beyond the scope of what I can talk about now. But there's things like SLATs, there's spousal lifetime access trust, there's the qualified personal resident trust we talked about last week. I think it's going to be a very powerful and popular strategy as we kind of come up to that deadline. The charitable remainder trust, which I'll talk about in a minute, is also, I think, going to become more popular. So my guess, Bill, is as it gets closer to the deadline, you'll see more and more discussions on that. And I'd hate to be a tax attorney at the end of 2025 because I'm guessing that it'll be unbelievably crazy, the last few months before the year. But I think you're right. We should be talking about this now. And ideally, you'd kind of have your ducks in a row and figure out what you want to do well before we hit that deadline.
Willie, that was a question I was going to ask is, how long can people wait before they make those decisions? And then how late is too late? I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'm not sure if I have a great answer for you on that. First off, we assume that bill is going to sunset. The last time we had an income tax bill that was due to sunset, President Obama and the Democrats were in charge, and what they did was pretty smart politically. They, although I didn't like it personally, but what they did was they kept all the provisions in place. They extended the ones for lower income earners, but if you made over, say, $250 a year, then you got a big tax increase. So, who knows? Maybe they'll do that again this year. But if that's the case, then we'll probably get the people that probably should most do the planning are the ones that would get hit the hardest. So you're drop dead for the exemption change. It's December 31st, 2025. Excuse me. So ideally, as somebody who's really into planning, if it was me, I'd want to start having this conversation next year, kind of understand what the options are, how they work, what the advantages are, what the considerations are, what the disadvantages are. You hate to make a giant decision like this, on the run off the seat of your pants. So, if we're working with someone and planning a trust and helping them that process, pretty common to meet with someone 2, 3, 4, 5 times over maybe an increment of 6 months to a year, and before we actually do something. Yeah. And that's just simply because it's good to understand the issues before we actually, implement something like this. Excuse me.
I think Lori, did you have something you wanted to say? You can unmute yourself if you want.
Well, I just want to say thank you. It was very informative. A lot of information coming out of Willie. A lot of this I've heard before, but it does help it's kind of like a little kick in the butt. You need to do something. You can't just think about it. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Lori. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jamie, for putting this together.
Yeah. Hey, Willie, do you have some kind of a little worksheet? Like, let's say we were all going to become your clients and you said, okay, I need you to fill out this worksheet and list all your assets. It's a very easy thing. Does that exist, that worksheet, or is that something else?
Well, yeah, actually, we have kind of a worksheet, Jamie, but we've kind of, my team is younger than me. They're dragging me, kicking and screaming in the 21st century. But what we do, Jamie, is we have a client dashboard that we set up that we can either manually or automatically input all their assets in there. So if we have a new client, we'll actually create a screen and we'll put all their assets in there. So it could be anything as simple as stocks or mutual funds or IRA accounts, to things as complex as stock options or restricted stock or commercial real estate or private equity or LLCs. And so we create this, we create a checklist based on the computer, and then our clients have full access to it. They can allow us to look at it, and then we can pull all that. We can throw all our software off that and run all of our, tax projections and income projections and future projections on that. So it's we've come a long way since Excel and PowerPoint. But if someone wants access to this dashboard, I have an unlimited number of licenses. I'm happy to send you a link to it. You don't have to let us have access to it. You can just use it yourself. I think it's very powerful. I use it for all my own assets. And so if someone wants to see that, just send me an email. I'll send you the link, and you can use it yourself. You can let your kids look at it. You can open a portal to your CPA or your attorney, and it's kind of a cool technology. So
yeah, that's really neat. We're going to do that, and maybe I can send your contact information to everybody, and they can get their own dashboard and just start sort of putting things in order and having things make sense.
Yep. So I've been talking for a while here. I did have one more topic. Should we talk about the charitable manager trust before we wrap up?
Yeah. Did anybody else have a question? Lori, is your hand still up, or are you good?
I'll lower my hand, but yeah. So, what do you give your clients who are not yet clients?
Well,
in terms of your materials, I know it's your charming personal self that you're luring them in with, but you must have some sort of. I think this portal idea is great, and we can use it without having to subscribe or anything, or something.
What I was able to negotiate, Lori, is just an unlimited license. So I'll be happy to send you a link, and you can use it to your heart's content. See if you like it, and it doesn't cost anything. It's really robust. I really like it personally, so happy to send that to you. That's
thank you, Willie, and that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I'll link you guys up. I'll link everybody up.
Perfect. Good. Well, let's hit our last subject. I just want to pull one more tool out of the toolbox and talk about a trust called the Charitable Remainder Trust. So, you may or may not have heard about this before. This trust has been around for years and years. I've been doing this for 30 years, and they were in the legal code before I even started. So, very powerful tool. And let me kind of walk you through how it works. If you can see the slide there, here's the steps in setting up a CRT. Number one is you establish a trust, and this trust is irrevocable. Once you set it up, you can't change it. But you set the trust up, and and the trust is specifically and best used for a highly appreciated asset. So once the trust is set up, if you have a highly appreciated asset, you can transfer that asset into the trust. And step number two, and here's where the magic begins, you can sell the appreciated asset in the trust and not pay any taxes, and you can reposition that to more of a diversified portfolio. So we know from last year there was a lot of craziness in the markets and the tech side. For example, companies like DocuSign and Zoom and Peloton were seeing just unbelievable drops in value. Even big companies like Microsoft and Amazon lost a lot of value. And even though these are fabulous, fantastic companies, if you work at that company or you were a smart investor in that company and you have a lot of appreciation, you're also subject to a lot of risk. So a lot of times, if we have a very highly appreciated asset, we might be itching to at least diversify some of it. But if we have a very low cost basis, it's very painful to diversify it. So inside the charitable remainder trust, you can sell that appreciated asset, and there's no taxes due, and you can reposition the asset once you sell it into something that's a little more diversified that might hopefully have a low risk and meet your needs better. So when you transfer the assets into the trust, the third thing that happens is you get a tax deduction, and the reason why is because at the end of the trust, whatever is left there goes to your favorite charity. So what the IRS says is, okay, Bill and Jamie, you've just made a gift to a charitable remainder trust. At some point down the road, when you make that gift, you'll get deduction. We're going to calculate what the value of that deduction is, but we'll let you use the deduction today. So they get a current deduction they get to use against their income. The fourth thing that happens is they get lifetime income from the trust. So the assets that are in the trust section required to pay income out. The most common way to do it, there's a number of ways to do it, but the most common way is to set up a fixed percentage. So for example, the minimum fixed percentage is 5%. If you've got, say, $2 million in a charitable trust like this, then the value at $2 million, your first year's income would be 5% times $2 million, or $100,000. And then every year the trust would get revalued, and whatever 5% of that is, that would be your income. So that income stream would continue forever, or at least as long as one of you is alive. And then finally, after you're both gone, then you get to take whatever is left and give that to your favorite charity. So, if you love your church, if there's a community group you support, Like for example, another meeting I had today, the family is very involved in a foundation that deals with rare genetic diseases. One of their grandkids has a very profound rare disease that's like a 1 in 10 million disease, and so they're super active in that. And if they set up a trust like this, they could choose to say, this is what we've been spending our life working on and supporting, and after we're gone, we'd like to leave some money to that too. So whatever your heart is, whatever your support, you can leave that in there. So that's the way it works. That's the mechanics, and it's again a very, very powerful tool. Been around a long time. Here's kind of going back to your comment, Bill. Charitable remainder trusts were extremely popular up until the late 90s. If you remember your tax history, we used to have a 28% top rate on capital gains taxes. And then with the Bush tax plan in the early 2000s, the capital gains rate went to 15%, and CRTs went just completely dark. And people rarely talked about them, and they weren't very popular. But the top capital gains rate now is back at 20%. And as estate taxes and maybe capital gains rates go up, I think you'll see more and more talk about this. So these charitable remainder trusts might be something that you'll see more people want to use in the future. So again, the advantages of the CRTs, number one is estate tax savings. So if whatever assets you put in the charitable remainder trust is removed from your estate, and so you won't pay any estate tax on there. Number two, you get a tax deduction. And here's, I'm going to tie this into a home sale in just a minute, and you'll see what the value of that is. But you get a current deduction based on the future value of your gifted charity. Number three, you get lifetime passive income. So remember, the charitable trust is required to pay annual income to you for as long as one of you is alive. Number four, you get tax-free diversification. We may want to sell the asset, but this is a way to sell it, not pay any taxes. And finally, the final point is we get to make a gift to charity after we're gone. The disadvantages are you have a loss of ownership. The trust is irrevocable. So once you transfer the asset in the trust, you basically give up all ownership, or I should say direct ownership. The trust controls it. And number two, it's complex. Just like some other things we talked about. You need a good CPA, a good tax attorney. You need somebody that can walk you through there, guide you through there, that's done this before and knows what the ins and outs are. And there's no more access to principal. You only can take income during the trust term, and after the term's over, the principal goes to your favorite charity, not to your kids. So there's some good things to it. There's some bad things to it, but it's a very powerful tool. So let me just take a minute, and I'm going to switch screens here, and I'm going to walk you through a case study and say, well, how could we potentially use a CRT? So let me go over here for just a minute, share screen. All right, can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Try to zoom this up a little bit. All right, so I'm going to read through this, but and I'll give you a copy of it if you want to look at it later. But so here's the case study I built, you guys. The Davidson family, both age 65, they both had great careers. They've amassed a really healthy estate. They're worth about $25 million. And part of the $25 million, they've got a concentrated position of a tech company stock, which they have a low cost base in. Their cost base is only $100,000, but the happy story is that it's worth about $2 million. And here's where the situation gets especially interesting. They have a waterfront home on Lake Sammamish. It's worth about $5 million. They bought it many years ago, and they're planning to sell the house and go somewhere else. So they anticipate a large capital gains tax bill when they sell the house. So the question they had was, hey, we know there's a big tax bill coming up. We want to sell it. We've got estate tax issues in the future. We've got this company stock we'd like to sell, but we don't want to trigger a giant tax bill. What do we do? So we asked them what were their goals. Well, the goals are to reduce future estate taxes. We'd like to diversify out of the stock a little bit. We'd like to get a tax deduction to try to take some of the sting out of selling our house. Wouldn't mind having some more income because we're going to kind of slow down with work pretty soon. There's some charities that we've been serving on and we're on the board. We'd like to maybe leave some money for them after we're gone. And again, we'd also like to kind of take away some of the tax bill from this home we're planning to sell. So those are our goals. So here's what we suggested, you guys. We said, first off, let's set up a charitable remainder trust. So we had an attorney draft a trust document. Once the trust document was drafted, we transferred the $2 million of tech stock into the CRT. So again, $2 million in assets to start off with. And we assigned a 5% payout rate to the trust. That's what we decided to pay out. And and so that was the initial thought. So once we put the $2 million into the trust, we immediately got a tax deduction. And again, they don't get to deduct the whole $2 million, but they get to deduct, the future value of the gift to charity. So I ran that through my calculator last night. So I got to admit, I was a little bit blurry eyed when I ran this, but I think this number is probably pretty close. But according to my calculation, their income tax deduction is going to be about $754,000. So remember, they're going to sell that $5 million house. They're going to get their $500,000 free. They get to, use their current cost base, but they still got a really big gain there. That $754,000 deduction can potentially be used against all the gain in the house. So that's going to reduce a lot of the pain in selling that Lake Sammamish house. So if they fund the trust the same year that the house sells, that could be very, very valuable to them. And so one of the things that Sam and Cheryl did was they set the trust up, but I didn't write this in the case study, but they didn't actually transfer the stock in until the house sold, or they knew for sure was going to sell, because they wanted to make sure it happened the same tax year. So number one big advantage, we just saved ourselves a ton of money on taxes by creating this significant income tax deduction to try to take some of the sting off the home sale. Number two, we as I mentioned before, we sold the stock and repositioned that into a diversified portfolio. And again, the initial value was $2 million. Well, we have a 5% payout rate. And of course, 5% times $2 million is $100,000 a year. And so the first year's income to Sam and Cheryl is $100,000. And then they get 5% a year based on whatever the trust goes every year thereafter. So, historically, a 60-40 portfolio has grown at a rate, quite a bit more than 5%. So, again, no guarantees for the future, but if we are able to earn a historical return in there, we might earn a return greater than the 5% payout rate. So what does that mean? We start off with $2 million, we take out our income, it grows a little bit. The next year's income might be a little bit more than the first year, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. So, if all works, according to history, Sam and Cheryl might get a growing income because the 5% is a 5% of a larger amount every year. And then when they're both gone, then the gift to charity might be even more than what we started with. So again, the estimated remainder value of the trust depends on what that works out. Just a simple linear calculation based on 20 years, there'd be $3.8 million left at the end of the 5 years. Again, I'm in the investment business. I have to say, estimates are provided for illustration purpose only. Actual returns might be more or less than we get. Nothing's guaranteed, but again, just kind of give you an example of what that might look like over time if we were fortunate enough to earn more than the growth rate of the portfolio. And then finally, the $2 million we put into the trust is excluded from their taxable estate. The estate tax rate starts at 40%. If they left the $2 million in there, 40% times $2 million is $800,000. That's a really big tax bill, but they moved that out. And so that is excluded from their estate. So they might have significantly reduced their estate tax liability by maybe as much as $800,000. So we got the income tax deduction, we got diversification, we got lifetime income, we got charitable giving, we got to help Sam and Cheryl meet their goals. And then finally, of course, when they sold their house, they got to offset a whole bunch of the tax by using this trust. So that's just a simple example, you guys, of how a charitable trust might kind of tie in with other financial things you're doing in your life. And in this case, if we're planning on selling a house that has a big gain, a CRT kind of alongside that might be a tool in the toolbox to try to help make our our sale a little bit more friendly and a little less tax onerous.
That's a great case study. it makes me think maybe we should ask you the list of 10 things never to do. I'm gonna have you list the 10 dumbest things to do, and then I will distribute those, because
Oh, that's funny. I never
I
thought.
don't wanna do them.
I'm gonna jot that down. I love I write a lot of articles, and I love, that's a great article idea. I'm usually thinking more proactively, but yeah, the 10 dumbest things, that might be a.
So
that-
Willie, so Willie has a great blog. I don't know if some of you have had a chance to look. Willie, what's the web address for your blog? Because every month Willie puts something awesome on there.
Yeah, it's actually a newsletter we send out by email. We also post it to our website. The email address is right there on the screen, geverswealth.com. It's a name my mom loves. But yeah, you can, if you go there, there's a newsletter section. You can sign up for our newsletter, and happy to share that with you. And I think we have about 1,000 people that we send the newsletter out to every, on a regular basis. Actually, Jamie and I actually had some follow up after our last class. So if you think of some things you'd like us to help you with, happy to kind of share some thoughts or planning, and kind of follow up on what we're talking about here today.